just add to the bottom of that page any additional information. And on page 400, it talks a little bit more about Woodrow Wilson. As a matter of fact, it says that his policy is known as what? Wilson and the, as soon as you get there, you'll see it. New Freedom. Okay, remember, Teddy Roosevelt's was Square Deal and Big Stick. Wilson's is New Freedom. That's kind of his main policy, especially his domestic policy, while he is president. And it's ironic, we saw this yesterday on the video a little bit about how he felt like most of his knowledge had to do with domestic affairs, and so he thought it would really be ironic if he ended up doing things mostly in the foreign realm. And of course, it is going to happen that way because of World War I. And so that presidents can't control a lot of the things that happen in their administration. Like President Trump, he could not control this pandemic. Nobody could control this pandemic, obviously. I mean, it's around the world. And I do believe that leaders have made mistakes, and I think probably President Trump has made mistakes, and most of the leaders of the world have made mistakes because it's just been one of those deals where, you know, we all would have made mistakes. You're just kind of trial and error. You're doing a little bit, and if that doesn't work, you do something else. But anyway, okay. It says one of the first important reforms of the Wilson administration was what? The Underwood Tariff Act. So write that one down. The Underwood Tariff Act of 1913. And it says, unlike Roosevelt and Taft, Wilson succeeded in achieving the first genuine tariff reform since the Civil War. If you remember, the Civil War was in the 1860s. So this is a long time back. The new tariff slashes overall rates by about a third from what they had been. And even more important, the act made up for a loss of tariff revenue by adopting what? It's one of the progressive amendments. Amendment 17 made us pay income tax, right? Okay. So that's one of the things for Wilson that you'll need to remember. And then the Federal Reserve Act. I think this one was probably one of the most important. In 1907, the latest in a series of financial panics. Now, depressions were labeled depressions starting in the 1930s. And of course, what is a depression? What is an economic depression? What does that really mean? Do y'all have any idea? A guess? It's when the economy is depressed. And I don't mean like it's sad, but it's prevented, the economy is not doing well. People don't have money. Oftentimes you can't get a job, so you can't get money. And when you don't have money, it really works in a cycle. When you guys have money, you go and buy stuff. When you buy stuff, the people that make stuff make more of it, okay? And they sell more of it to the stores. And so then there's more and more of these goods available. And when there's a lot in particular, if there's one particular good that there's a lot available, then they can reduce the cost of that. So it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And so when things get cheaper and cheaper and people are working and people have money, then they can buy it. And so it just continues to flourish, if you will. But the reverse happens too. When people don't have money, or even if they're just afraid that they might not have money, then they go in the very opposite direction. They don't buy stuff. And when people don't buy things, then places like Walmart or Kroger's or anywhere that sells things, they stop buying their supply from the manufacturers. So guess what the manufacturers do? They lay people off and they stop making as much. And so then that causes more people then to not have any money. And so more people are not buying anything. And so a depression is really when people are unable to get work, and therefore they are unable to have money. So they're unable to purchase goods, and so goods are going to waste away. I mean, you might have all kinds of stuff that people want, but because there's no money, they can't buy them. And so, to be honest, and I'm not a gloom and doom kind of person, but I am a little concerned about this pandemic, in the sense that when the pandemic is over, when they have a vaccine, I'm afraid there's going to be so many people throughout the world that have lost jobs and lost the ability to make money, that we may see kind of like another Great Depression. Maybe not to the extent of the Great Depression in the 1930s, but, you know, I do think we need to be, of course, praying about this and asking the Lord to give us wisdom and guidance. And, you know, we just need to be mindful of these things. I expect Christmas is, for some businesses, the make it or break it time. They either make enough money. Well, I'll use my dad as an example. My dad had a jewelry store when I was a kid. And Christmas, we worked around the clock. I mean, Christmas, the 1st of December, we went to that jewelry store early, and we worked till late. There was no mall. It was everybody's shop down on Princeton, Mercer Street. All kinds of little businesses and shops down Mercer Street. It was really kind of cool when I was a kid. But, I mean, we would be in that jewelry store 12 hours a day, I mean, during December, because that month was very important to my dad. That was the month where he made money. Most of the money he made was working on watches and fixing rings and, you know, just doing that sort of thing. Every once in a while, he would sell somebody a diamond ring or something. But for the most part, he made his money during December. And that's the way it is for a lot of small businesses. Well, this Christmas, because of the pandemic, because so many people have been without work, number one, they're not going to have extra money probably to afford to go out and spend a lot of money. But even if they do, they're probably going to be so concerned about what's coming next as to whether or not they'll go out and spend. So this Christmas season could be the death knell for some small businesses. Anyway, I don't know. We don't know, but we do need to be praying about this. We need to pray for our nation, pray for our country, pray for the world, because, I mean, it's not just us, of course, that's being affected by all of this. And there again, the company that comes up with the vaccine first, they're going to do very well. They're going to make a lot of money. And so that's why I think there's some genuine competition out there. You know, wouldn't you love to be the person that comes up with the vaccine for the coronavirus? I mean, you would be set for life financially. Not only would you be helping people, but you would be doing very well financially. Anyway, so before they called these episodes where money is depressed, people don't have money, people don't have jobs, they used to call them panics. Throughout history, in American history especially, they would call it like the Panic of 1898, or the Panic of this, or the Panic of that. And then starting with the Depression, they changed the name, thinking that that would calm people down. If you hear that there's a panic, what goes through your mind is, you know, be afraid. Okay, so they thought if they changed the name that maybe it wouldn't be, it sounds quite so bad, but it's still the same thing. So anyway, in 1907, the last in a series of financial panics or depressions left American businessmen desiring a better system of regulating the currency. So these businessmen envisioned something similar to the Bank of the United States that had been around before Andrew Jackson destroyed it. They argued that such a centralized, privately owned national bank could easily set standards and regulations for the flow of currency throughout the country. The nation's business interests, therefore, would present the request to the leaders in Washington, and that ended up being the Federal Reserve Act. That's what you need to write down. the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. And today we kind of nickname the Federal Reserve just the Fed. And they talk about it all the time on the news, if you're ever, watching the news. Especially, just to kind of put it in a nutshell, are you guys warm? Should we turn on the air? You're not, you'll be too cold if we have it on. Okay, are you all right? You good? You want the air on? We may have to switch, boys and girls, so it is crazy to be at the end of October and talking about air conditioning. But anyway, just to kind of summarize it briefly, what the Fed does, the Fed loans money to banks, okay? Basically, they get their money. Banks get their money from the Federal Reserve. Well, the Federal Reserve decides what amount of interest it's going to charge the bank. All right. Now, of course, what's interest? What do I mean by that? Right. Okay. If you think of a bank is a money store. You go to the bank to buy money. Okay. The way you buy money, you borrow $5,000 to buy a car. Well, by the time you get through paying it, you're probably going to end up paying about $6,500 back. So they're selling you $5,000 for $1,500, and you'll pay it back over time. You pay a little bit back along the way, kind of like a mortgage on your mom and dad's house or on my house. You borrow money to buy your house, and then you pay it back a month, and the bank gets some interest off of that. Okay, and that's why they're willing to do that. Well, the Fed controls how much they charge the banks in interest, okay? Well, if they charge the banks a little bit of interest, if say the percentage is 2 or 3%, well, then the banks will charge people a little bit of interest. They won't charge them an enormous amount of interest. They might charge the people 4 or 5%, okay? Which that's still bad enough, but that's, it's been a lot worse than that in different times. Okay, so if the Fed wants people to have money, and they want you to borrow money from the bank so that you have money so that you'll build homes and so that you'll buy cars, what they do is they reduce the interest that they charge the banks. So that way they can control it. I know it sounds a little complicated, but if you just stop and think about it, it's really not. The bank passes on to us whatever the Fed does to them. If the Fed charges them a lot of interest, they're going to charge a lot of interest. If the Fed doesn't charge them a lot of interest, then they're going to pass those savings on to the consumer. If you wanted to buy a car right before you go to college, and if the interest rate was 10%, which it's not going to be that high, I would hope. Well, nobody's going to buy a car. But if you're going to borrow the money from the bank and you're going to have to pay back 10% of whatever you borrow, you're probably going to say, maybe I'll look into getting a bicycle. Maybe I'll get a moped and just buzz around the campus on a moped, or better yet, maybe I'll just walk and stay healthy. But if the interest rates go down real low and you can get a car for pretty cheap and not have to pay a lot of interest on it, then you might say, hey, I'm going to get me a car. And of course, you tell mom and dad, if you let me get a car, I can come home more often, you'll see me more often, which that might have the opposite effect, actually. But it probably wouldn't. They would probably be glad to see you. But I mean, that's one way in which the Federal Reserve controls the amount of money that's out there in circulation. And, of course, if there's a lot of money chasing goods and services, if there's a lot of money, then those goods and services are going to increase in price. That's called inflation. Okay, but we don't want to get into all that. But anyway, so just know that the Federal Reserve was a way in which the government is able to control the amount of money that is in circulation. The Clayton Antitrust Act, look on down to that. I want you to know that one too. Wilson's administration passed 2 important pieces of legislation in 1914. The Clayton Antitrust Act, which all it did was strengthen the Sherman Antitrust Act, and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. And this was to define fair business practices and to make business corporations follow fair business practices. You know, I've said it a lot. We're sinful critters, aren't we? And people will take advantage of others when they can. Right or wrong, they do it. We do it. It's not right, but people do it. So it is good that the government was able to step in here and make some changes. Okay, skip on over to the next. And this I want you to do on your own. Okay? How is society going to be changed with the progressive movement? And one way is through automobiles, another way is through the airplanes, another way is through farming practices and procedures, new technology, medicine and education, okay? So I just want you, and you can start, well, you don't have a lot of time, but tonight, go through, and you can put it in an outline form, and it's could kind of be like your outline for this chapter, but just go down through and just Roman numeral 1, automobiles, and list what it says about Henry Ford mostly, okay, and automobiles. The Model T. Henry Ford said you can have any color you want as long as it's black. They only made black cars at first. And he's going to come up with a way, Henry Ford is going to come up with a way to mass produce. And that is going to cut the cost of the car down. Because if you've got to charge somebody for all this labor and work that you're putting into making something, then that's going to make it far more expensive. Henry Ford is going to come up with the whole conveyor belt system of mass production, where people on the assembly line, as it was called, would do just one particular thing. Okay, you got a group of men that just make the tires. And these wheels and tires are made out of wood originally, guys. Okay, so they make the tires and they put the tires on, and that's all they do. And so that's all you're doing all day long. It's the same repetitive job. And so you get very good at it and very fast with it. And through the assembly line, he was able to roll off one car after another, and so he could sell them for relatively, at that time, relatively cheap. And that's going to make it so everybody can have a car, which was huge. And then, of course, the airplanes is going to be the Wright brothers. And just give the basics for each one. Automobiles, airplanes, agriculture, education, and medicine. Questions? Okay.